Hello. I hope
Oh,
everyone survived the deluge in good shape. In one piece, I was going to say,
mm,
well, it wasn't deadly, but we did see on the news a couple of people stranded in Santa Rosa and other North Bay areas where creeks overflowed in their cars, having to be rescued. So it wasn't just a little extra rain, obviously. So I know there's power failures or power outages, I guess, all over the Bay Area, at least mostly limited, I think, to the mountainous areas, but it could be affecting, I know, some people's internet connections, since I'd like to think that's one, if not the only, or at least one of the main reasons why uh, there was a lower attendance so far this at this point than there has been in any previous of one of our Zoom classes. But I also need to give you guys, it's not a caveat because I just happened to notice right before, let's let this person in here, right before those of you who are attending the Wednesday class uh, saw what I most wanted to show, which were the two African slides we skipped over on Monday. But because of the fact that that session A didn't record and B, I didn't say you had to take notes, remember that if you were in the Wednesday class or you wanted to see it, I didn't record it because I didn't have a chance. My power went out, which that was on me. I forgot to plug the cord into the wall. And by the time I fished around to find it in my office, right, the whole laptop thing connection disappeared. So obviously I've recharged it. And that lecture, you're not responsible for the two slides that are from the syllabus. So let us now confirm that if you were wondering, because you might have gone on YouTube and said, what happened to the Wednesday lecture? I wasn't intending to record it actually, although I probably would have just for your own interest, but I didn't, I couldn't. So, okay, let's go back one step to week 10. That would have been what we covered on Wednesday, just as a informational, session. We got through two slides and then I was about to show you my Art Institute slides from Chicago of world art at the Art Institute, one of the world's greatest collection. It was even written up in several newspapers recently. They just reopened a new wing there in the Art Institute of Chicago. If you ever go there, you should take a look at it because it's exactly the subjects we're covering in this class. Both the Western and non-Western art galleries are fabulous at the Art Institute. Okay, but that's not, it wasn't about to be anywhere on the syllabus or otherwise. You wouldn't have need to take notes, but we never got to those. So we did cover Reliquary Guardian, but cross it off if you didn't already. If you were on the Wednesday session, you would have done that. And then the twin figures from Nigeria. Actually, I took that already off the syllabus for required or must know slides for week 10. It's not even on the syllabus, but in case you were wondering, it is in Stockstead. I did show slides of it, but you'll have to know about that one. It was the identical twin female figures from Nigeria. So that's just by way of clarification from what happened last week. Now, let's talk about, let's see. Okay. Hi, welcome. If you don't mind my asking, have you gotten a bow since you just joined us? Have you gotten, welcome, Paulo. We haven't gotten to the slides, so you haven't missed anything. Just some cleanup type announcements. And the reason I'm bringing these up is because I've returned, this is the next order of business. Each of these is just a couple of minutes at most. Mentioning, in case you just joined, the last two or three people that just signed on, the last week's lecture A wasn't recorded, nor were any of the slides I showed before my laptop fritzed out because it wasn't connected properly in the office I teach on Wednesdays. My laptop's battery ceased working, so that wasn't recorded. So that's why if you didn't see it on YouTube, that's the reason. You didn't need to know any of those slides anyway. But now, for those of you who have, and it should be just about everybody, but I'm not sure if Bao and that would include you, I returned the grades and brief comments on each of the exams that were midterms that I've graded, and me and the readers, and entered them all in the roll book. But one or two people who had email addresses that didn't match their name. So, and I didn't have any record of their correct email. When I plugged their names in, nothing came up. So I couldn't return those because I didn't, I guess, ask anyone. I know I didn't ask anyone to put your email addresses on your either your papers or your midterm. So from now on, I will remind you that's a good thing to do. If your email address is not based on your name or the way you registered or enrolled in the class, that name, that can cause confusion. It has ever since the distance learning, period. We've been through 3, or is it now 4 semesters, right, of distance learning beginning in spring of 2020, of course, when the first shutdown happened. So point is that if you didn't get anybody, this should only apply to at most 2 people in this class. If you somehow didn't get your midterm grades, you need to email me at markw@aol and mention that, and I will then be able to forward directly to you under reply, obviously. Then I'll have a stored record of your email address. Okay. Anybody have any questions now about that topic? Because I've given everyone else the grade that had a stored email address, and that's almost everybody. You guys did well in the midterm. I want to say that overall. I mean, nobody, well, just about nobody had really, and even a few people who got a lower grade maybe than an A or a B. It's not, a total disaster by any means. You can recover and get still at least a B in the class if you do all the extra credit. Nobody's come close to doing that. Okay, Fernando. Okay, we're just doing some announcements. You haven't missed anything. Okay, so if you just joined us, we're about to start the first slides, and we have a lot to cover in the next 2 classes, today and Wednesday. But before we get to the first slide, just to finish up, just a little bit of information for you, which is that the second paper, this will be my last announcement before we start the lecture here. The second paper, there we go, welcome again, is due November 8th. And all I can say about when last time we brought this up was a week ago, I think, Monday. Yeah, the last week's Monday lecture. Somebody told me, or 1 or 2 people, that they somehow got this is no way this should have or even could happen as far as I can see. There's no class November 10th. It's a teacher planning day. So the paper is due by midnight November 8th. I'm looking at the same syllabus. I double checked after 1 or 2 students thought or said they thought that somehow their syllabus or version of it had November 10th. It's not the 10th, it's the 8th if you want to turn in on time. I'm looking at the same syllabus that I forwarded to everybody as a JPEG or PDF. I'm sorry, JPEG. I apologize. It's a PDF, which is how we're required to do it. Just to make certain, I double checked. I brought that up, opened the file, and there it is, the exact same date and all the same slides that I've got on my master, of course, copy that I refer to as we go through the lecture notes. So I don't know how anyone might have a different date, but that doesn't change the fact that your second paper is due 2 weeks from today on Monday, November 8th by midnight. Okay, any questions about that or any other things relating to extra credit or grading at all? And then, of course, I'll stick around as always afterwards when we finish today's lecture portion. Okay, so let's now get to the first slide for today. And ironically, this was written up in, of all things, the Wall Street Journal wrote up a whole piece on this. They have a column on Sundays. I don't subscribe. My wife does. Don't ask me politically. We might not agree on things. Hey, people have the right to disagree. I subscribe to that liberal rag, is what some conservatives call it, the San Francisco Chronicle, and I've occasionally written for it. So in the Wall Street Journal's arts section, which there's no political angle there, they cover works of art once a week. I think it's on their Saturday edition, and I clip those pieces when they relate to what we're covering in class. And the last Saturday one had this very slide. So let's take a look at, well, not slide, this painting, and a nice long explanation of who William Hogarth was. One of the most underappreciated by Americans. In Britain, they know him. In Europe, they know him. But here, he's not well known. He should be. And he will be by all of you, because there's one of those slides. I always give you guys, right, a heads up, that has a high probability of being on the final. Now, remember, the final's not cumulative. So you can forget everything you had to study for the midterm. So here we go. We're under today's list, of course, is from week 11. And this is the first must know. And I won't cut it from the study list if that's not obvious. That's what I'm saying. Hogarth, the artist name, Hogarth. Hogarth. His first name was William Hogarth. You need to know the last name. What's on the syllabus. The marriage contract Okay, the marriage contract, 1745. So let's start with who was William Hogarth, or you could just say Hogarth in your notes. Hogarth was some people consider, or just say many art historians, or just say historians, many historians consider him to be the first political cartoonist. That's a major statement because 300 years ago, in the early 1700s, he began drawing satirical commentaries for newspapers. They called them journals then, but they were basically the same as news. Usually they were, well, sometimes they were daily. So they were, just say periodicals. You can say periodicals, magazines, both, and newspapers or journals. So you just want to say periodicals. That's any publication in print that comes out at a regular interval. So, whether weekly, daily, doesn't matter. Just say it this way. He was the first famous, always want to say it that way because there could be someone we don't know about yet, but the first famous um, artist, Western artist, to regularly, or you can say consistently uh, address social ills in British society through cartoons and paintings or drawings. You could just say drawings and paintings. He was superb at both paintings, oil paintings, that's what this is, and line drawings. His line drawings were seen by millions of people. Well, it's hard to say because they didn't keep records on all, but by many, just say hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of British citizens, those who could, of course, subscribe to a newspaper or magazine or buy one. He was very popular. He was a very influential artist. Why? Because he addressed topics that, as I just said, I'll repeat that or his paintings, I'm sorry, his paintings and drawings both address topics that had to do with the social ills that were plaguing British society at that time. And this is an example of what the evils of arranged marriage can lead to. Or I should say that arranged marriage, what evils an arranged marriage can lead to. Oh, it's a very, very wicked series. So, how did he do that? He didn't just paint one scene, he painted one every month. So, this is part of one of his series of monthly paintings, which were then converted, of course, by him. He did this personally, into line drawings and published in newspapers and magazines all over Britain. I assume probably, first choice would be whatever newspaper he had a contract with. So first they'd appear in a major newspaper or magazine as a line drawing, and then later the paintings would be displayed or exhibited, in different galleries or museums. So he would start with the painting. That's what this. Then he convert. Welcome. We're just getting started on the first must-know slide. This is the marriage contract by Hogarth. So what this series did? One drawing of each of these paintings. First, he did the painting, and then the drawing would appear every month. Just to clarify, and the audience that way he gets them hooked. Of course, it's just like Netflix series today, right, or whatever you guys watch it, and of course some kinds of comic strips in the newspapers. I don't even know what anybody sees, but I know you could find them easily online, of course. So he would get his audience hooked, you could say. I don't want to say addicted, that's too strong a word, on following the progress of the people that he was critiquing or a better word is satirizing. So he was a social satirist, but his subjects dealt with more than just individual misbehavior. They dealt with social ills or evils, depending on how you want to define that. So, what was he saying about arranged marriage? Well, let's start with the fact this is the first in the series called Marriage a la Mode. You've all had ice cream a la mode, right? Or not ice cream. That means, right? Oh, pie a la mode. There we go. Or some kind of dessert, right? With something on the side. So, this is called Marriage a la Mode. I'll spell it for you for those who haven't written that phrase. Three words, of course, la, L-A, of course, mode, M-O-D-E. Marriage a la Mode was a series that skewered the idea of arranged marriage, which was much more common among middle and upper class families. So, if it's not obvious, these are not poor people. But it was also not unknown, and it still is not uncommon among working class and poor families. He's saying it's a bad thing in this series. And how is he conveying that idea or that criticism, if you want to say? of his view of arranged marriage. Well, let's start with the couple. Let's get up close. This is the soon to be married couple. Do they look happy? They're so in love. Obviously, he's saying they can't stand each other. They won't even look at each other because they had no choice in the matter. So here's a lawyer. See, he's got a pen and he's helping. And then there's another lawyer over here. There's one lawyer for each of the two fathers. The fathers couldn't care less, in other words, about the happiness of their own children. And so what we have here is the father in the orange coat is the father of the fop. Now that's a word that they would have used back then, FOP. That means a ne'er-do-well, somebody who's, obviously not going to be loyal or obey any kind of family value. So he's just going to go out and see prostitutes and get drunk and bring home, sexually transmitted diseases. It goes from there downhill. This series goes through all of the phases of a toxic marriage that you could imagine, and some you probably couldn't. And he illustrates each one once a month as it gets worse and worse and worse. And the marriage eventually leads to death, suicide of one, I forget who doesn't, dies, and what, and fire, and infectious diseases and abuse of the children. That it's depressing, but it's meant to be that, because these two guys are the evil really here. Here is the wealthy. Sorry, I misspoke. I misspoke. So let me rephrase it. The guy in red is the father of the bride to be. He's a wealthy merchant. He's an upcoming, the word nouveau riche. You could just write it that way. Don't ask me to spell that. Nouveau riche, two French words. 20% of all English words are French in origin, if you didn't know that. That's why we have so many phrases like nouveau riche, right? I mean, he's an upstart, according to the old money people, the wealthy noble families. But guess what? Some of them were on hard times, had fallen. I meant to say fallen on hard times. That's what's happened to this guy. He still has this fancy mansion and all these paintings, so he's not poor, and he's certainly not about to be homeless, but he's lost maybe whatever, much of his wealth. So he wants his son. That's who this father is. This guy is the nobleman who's, very high ranking in society, but he's cash poor. He wants an infusion of cash, really. That's what it is. He's selling, in essence, this man is selling his daughter to this man's family so that he can gain a title. Of course, he'll get that out of it. What do they get? Just something for their, personal selfish needs, and nothing for their children's happiness. And the follow-up to this, if I had time, I'd show you the next 2 or 3 scenes. Even early on, when they first get married, the night after their honeymoon is no picnic. And it goes downhill from there. So, summarizing again, this scene depicts two fathers who couldn't care less about the happiness of their own children. The one in the red coat, father of the bride, just wants the prestige of a title, right? In order to, let's see, is that everyone's here? Okay, good. Thought somebody else wanted to be admitted. Let's see. Let me just take a second. Okay, everyone's here. All right. Because I heard usually that means someone's joining us. All right, so let's just summarize it and then we'll get to the formal analysis. What we have is two uncaring fathers, two self-centered, you can just say selfish or whatever. And this man is literally selling his daughter for an infusion of cash to this man's family, the father of the groom. And he needs cash. In fact, he's selling his family heritage. In fact, you can see it right there. See, growing out of the belly of a, say, 500-year-old suit of armor. Of course, it's an ancestor who started their noble family line or tree. And that's the family tree there. So you get people, even who couldn't read, understood what these cartoons were trying to get across. They would understand what the criticism of Hogarth is of this, the dangers of arranged marriages. Sometimes they work out, we know that, but they quite often end up not only being loveless, but abusive and toxic. And that's what happens to this couple. Okay, so that's pretty much the whole meaning. The two lawyers are sitting around, negotiating the terms of who gets what, when can he call himself sir, whatever, lord something, and what title can he use, and how much money is he going to get out of this guy's family. That's all they care about. Okay, So that's the whole meaning. Now, Hogarth, by the way, turned into a very powerful voice. This last part of the meaning, to me, this is a big positive thing about him. Anyone who's ahead of their time by, a century or more, I consider, a really valuable kind of moral, example. He set the movement for animal rights off. Some say he's not the founder. You can't say he founded, PETA didn't exist then. We're not talking about that. We're talking about just not abusing animals like they were, garbage or, you know, some property that you could just torture or abandon or starve or beat. And that's what people did, many of them to their own, well, horses especially, but all kinds of animals. So he detested that kind of abuse of innocent, defenseless animals, and he did a series of this same kind, 12 paintings showing the progress of animal abusers. And it starts out with a little boy whose parents think it's funny when he tortures the cat, and by the end, this guy's become a serial killer. Killed his wife and his children, and has gone missing from they had investigators and they have police departments, but they were criminal investigations. And so this guy gets away with literally first abusing pets, then when he's an adult, his own animals, horses and things, and then eventually his wife, and then his children. And the point he's making is that it's dangerous to allow people, children especially, to think it's okay to abuse animals. Nobody else was saying that back then, at least certainly not in print or in prints, literally in prints, in a public forum. He's one of the first artists to address abuse of animals as an evil. For that alone, I would admire him. Okay, so let's do the form analysis. This is so carefully balanced. It's brilliantly balanced. But this guy is the one making this whole thing happen, right in the middle, and equal numbers of, it's obviously balanced. And to me, the paintings balance it with the people, I'd say. But if you think the people seem to have more mass, technically, I guess you could say it's unbalanced or weighted toward the bottom. Rhythm is very obvious. These paintings create rhythm. And of course, the human figures of the arms, hands, heads, legs. And then the semi texture, well, it's still a period of realism in painting. We haven't gotten to, we will next week, to the beginnings of a break away from realism. But Renaissance realism still reigned. There we go. Renaissance realism reigned, dominated the whole profession of painting throughout the Western world. At this point, nobody was experimenting yet with non-realistic imagery. So everything, in other words, both simulated textures on the hair, the clothing, the skin, the room itself, super sharp and realistic. And all his paintings were like that. And the modeling is very strong and realistic, as you can see on their faces and their hands and their clothing. The colors, of course, are cool over here, because that's not an accident. That's a signal to the viewer, even if they can't read. This couple is more than just cool to each other. They hate each other. They haven't even been married yet. And then we have the warm colors, warm from the passion of egotism and greed. Really, greed is the underlying, motion here for the two parents, the two fathers. But they're dressed in warm colors, of course, and at least their overcoats. And the background of the room, cool on the walls, warm on the paintings, of course. Now here for a space, you do see atmospheric perspective. There's a little bit of a hazy blue look on the building across the street. This would be like, a big open plaza or something outside the window. So this has scientific perspective, no question it has that, vanishing point. Overlapping, of course. Foreshortening, you especially see it on the table and the walls. Diminishing size, absolutely, the paintings get smaller and the people out in the courtyard. And of course, then also, as I just said, atmospheric perspective outside the window. There's thin outlines everywhere. That would be the normal rule, though sometimes you see bold outlines in paintings from this period. But these are all thin outlines on all the human figures and the objects. And then let's see, stable or dynamic. I see it as more stable than dynamic, but if you see it as the other way around, I wouldn't dispute that if this is on the exam. The leaning over of the heads on these two figures, and of course the arms. Well, actually here his arms are almost at a right angle, and so are hers. But this lawyer's leaning over. But to me, with the room is mostly stable, although we see, of course, the diminishing size and foreshortening makes the walls appear dynamic. So you could say it's both. But I think if you look at the individual lines on all the objects and the human figures, mostly stable. Okay, rhythm, dynamic, stable. Let's see, texture. I think we've covered everything. Have I forgotten anything? Don't think so. Okay, let's move on to. We have to skip ahead. These are from Stockstead. We don't have time to cover a lot of these. They're interesting. I believe I hit this one on here. Let me see if I took this off. Yeah, because I was trying to shorten this list because we have more world art in the last couple semesters since we've done remote classes, which is, as I said, where the department and art history in general is moving in that direction. And you'll notice that if you take any art history classes that are called world art after the fall, no, spring, starting fall next year, you'll actually, absolutely, you will be seeing in any art history class at Santa Rosa JC, and I imagine any other Bay Area colleges, much more world art than you would normally have. So I didn't include this, so we're going to skip it. I cut it, in other words. It's a female painter, but we are going to have a really important female painter in just a few more slides. This one's fascinating, but again, we're not covering. However, this one is really important. This one may be the most important American painting, and the first, I should say, and one of the most important early American paintings by an early American artist. Okay, so here we go. This is the next must know. It's down on the third on your list for this week. Week 11. Of course, Copley is the artist's last name. Copley. Copley. Watson and the Shark. I'm sure you can all spell those words, right? Four words. Watson and Shark. Of course, that's S-O-N on his name. Watson, the last name of the idiot that jumped in the bay. I'll tell you why I call him that in a minute. So you got the title and the date, 1778. So if it's on the exam, you could just say 1770s if you want. Okay, so this is an early romantic painting. Now you should have your terms to know, of course, as you always are supposed to, in front of you as we go through these slides. So now we have two new definitions. Okay, so the three main features of romantic art might appear as a true-false question. You notice now that everyone here took the midterm, and you saw how he did that. I would write something, roughly the same, sentence or a sentence taken from one of the definitions that I've given you, like this list here. Now we're going to just do three main features of romantic art, and then write out a sentence. And if any part of it is false, the whole thing is false. If it's completely correct, then it's true. Okay, so here we go. I will say these slowly and repeat them once. The three main features of romantic art are, okay, number one, bold, vivid, and unrealistic colors. Number one feature, okay, I'll say it again, are bold, vivid, and unrealistic colors. Okay. All right, number two, or second feature, is dynamic and imaginative compositions. Dynamic and imaginative compositions, meaning they aren't strictly conveying a real scene. That's something maybe slightly imaginary. We'll talk about how that fits in this painting in a minute. Okay, that's the second one. Everybody got that? Okay, number three, okay, is a strong emotional component. A strong emotional component. All romantic paintings have some kind of emotion the artist is trying to convey, in other words. So again, third feature, a strong emotional component. Okay, so this has all three, absolutely. Plus, it has one more thing that many, not all, but many romantic paintings and neoclassic. So we're covering, those are the two topics for this whole week, for this lecture and all of Wednesdays. And we'll define neoclassicism, I think, before we get to the end of today's lecture. But for now, we're just looking at romantic painting, which has a moral lesson that it's trying to teach. Not all romantic paintings did, but many did. That's not one of the three features. I gave you those just to make sure everybody clear on that. The three that are always a part of or features of any romantic painting. And then a fourth one that can occasionally be, or another, you can say another quality of many romantic paintings, not all, is that they have a moral lesson. So what's going on here? Okay, this is really important, the meaning. This is a painting by Copley, who was the first famous American painter. There's no debating that. the first famous American painter. However, he had to move to England to make a good living because it just wasn't enough of a market. That's the right word, market, right? I mean, artists have to sell, to eat, right? He just couldn't make a living. You could say it that way if you prefer that phrase, by selling his paintings, even though he was very talented and respected in Boston. Anybody ever go to Boston? If you haven't and you ever do, you're going to see his name all over that city. Copley Square, Copley Subway Station, Copley Street, Copley Park. He's very popular and famous in Boston because, again, the reason is he's the first famous American painter. But he had to move to England to make a full-time living, and that's where he lived when he painted this scene. So now let's say what's going on in this scene, where you can get some idea from the figures in it, human and animal. But let me explain. Okay, this was an incident, an actual incident that occurred when a British merchant ship, that means they're not sailors, they're not, military, right? British merchant ship was in Havana Harbor. That's Cuba. I don't think any of you said you've been to Cuba. I've been several times. It's a beautiful place. Havana, Cuba. It's the oldest city in this hemisphere, oldest Western city in this hemisphere. Um, pretty impressive, full of history. Even this far back, 250 years ago, it was already an old city. So you see the city skyline in the background. That's realistic. You see the boats here. Which this is the boat that there's the British flag, right? This crew came from. That's a merchant ship, right? That's an easy way to distinguish it from a naval vessel. Anyway, so a British merchant ship was harbored. Now, what you'd be writing at this point, the summary of what's happening here is, while they were there, some of the crew took a rowboat out into the harbor, and one of them, named Watson, jumped into the water and was immediately attacked by a shark. Well, again, if you never get to Havana, I doubt any of you will, but I can tell you, having been there several times, you have to be an idiot to do that. You can see the sharks from the shore, from the coastline. They're all over that harbor. Their fins stick up. People sell shark meat on the Malecon to tourists and other. You could just say the sharks are very prevalent or very visible in the harbor. So that's why I'm calling this guy Watson an idiot. But was he nude? Oh, no, he wasn't nude. He didn't stop and strip. That would have taken a couple minutes with the clothing that they wore. So that's imaginary. That's one of the things that marks this as a romantic painting. He jumped in and was attacked by a shark, but he wasn't nude, the real Watson. He was, at least partially clothed, or mostly. He probably took his boots off, but that's all. And so when he was attacked by the shark, part of one leg was bitten off. If you look clear, you can see it. It's missing. Now, Copley he never went to Cuba. So he interviewed the crew, and he actually paid them to pose. So these are all real people. They did look the way he portrays them. These are the crew. They were the fellow crew members of Watson. That's how Watson looked, but Watson wasn't naked, okay? Otherwise, it's pretty accurate, including the African, Britanno-African it would have been. He wasn't a slave. He was a freedman. And he's the one who actually saved Watson's life by throwing the rope in. Now, the shark has something else about it. Does anybody know anything about, you don't have to be a marine biologist to know, there's something totally unrealistic or inaccurate about how the shark is painted. Take a look. Anybody? Guess what do you think?
Is it his eyes?
No, his eyes are actually accurate.
Really?
Well, look at
nostrils.
That's a good guess. They're slightly exaggerated. That's true. You could say that, but the main thing that is just laughably inaccurate. Anybody know? Nobody's ever seen the shark up close at Monterey. What's in?
Is that teeth?
Yeah, say it again. I'm almost pointing at it, but I don't.
I don't know how to say, like the teeth. The teeth.
No, the teeth are.
But they have like several things on
No,
inside.
it's the lips. The
Yeah,
they retract to bring the teeth out when they
That
eat.
should make some of you laugh. I mean, Yeah, again, I don't, hey, Monterey Bay Aquarium's open again, but I know it was closed for a while. Anyway, we've taken my daughter there at least twice, and she's looking, she knows this painting. I've shown it to her. She said, no, I've never seen a shark with lips. When she was little, she even realized this was not accurate. He never saw a shark or even a dead, stuffed, mounted, whatever you want to call it, shark. Copley never saw a shark, but he put lips on every version of this painting, and that's another important detail of the meaning. There's two more facts you should have, and then we'll do a formal analysis, which is that he painted multiple versions. This painting made him famous, world famous. I believe even someone in Asia, one or two people bought copies. There are copies in about 3 American museums. Well, one's in Canada. I forget where that is, probably Toronto or somewhere. And there's 2 in the United States. The one I've seen is in Boston, his hometown. Someone in Boston bought a copy of it from the artist, meaning another, repainted version of it. And in every one, he made slight changes, but in every one, he incorrectly put lips on the shark. So that's imaginative. The colors that mark it as romantic, this last part of the meaning, what else marks as romantic besides the imaginative, he wasn't nude and the sharks don't ever have lips. The water, that water isn't that looks like the Chicago River on St. Patrick's Day. If you know, I'm from Chicago. They dye it green. They've been doing that for 70 years or something, or 60 at least, since I was a kid. They just, he didn't know. He'd never been to Havana, so he painted the water more clear, and you wouldn't be able to see Watson's leg, that far below the surface that clearly, the one that got half bitten off. Nor would you be able to see, see water that color of green. So that color is a bold, vivid, unrealistic color, of course. And then we have one more thing, fog. No, fog. It may be minimal, but the more you look over here, that's where you see it mostly. No, I've been to Havana every season of the year because I had friends there that I was lucky enough to, they had not literally, but figuratively adopted me. So they kind of enjoyed, showing me around their country, their culture, not just Havana. I went all over Cuba in a rented car that I let them drive because I didn't want to drive in a country I don't speak the language. So I was in Havana in winter, spring, summer, and fall. Never saw fog. It's too hot. Even in the winter, it doesn't get below about 72 degrees. So once in a blue moon, I'm sure there could be, but there was no fog that day. It was a summer day, a bright lit midday summer weather. It would have been no fog. So he put the fog in deliberately to create a mood, right, of a dreamlike, or you could say nightmare, more like nightmare-like mood. So that's also unrealistic. And of course, the whole thing is dynamic. Well, not all of it, but not the background, actually, the town and the ship's mast, but the crew and the boat are mostly leaning over. The shark and Watson, obviously the boat itself, the rowboat are all dynamic. So it's a dynamic, imaginative composition, and then obviously has bold, unrealistic colors, and also you could say it's modeling. We'll get to the formal elements in just one more fact about the meaning. But what's the strong emotional component? Anybody want to take a guess here? What do you think he's trying to convey? Well, look at the faces. Let's get up closer of the crew. Well, fear. Yeah, fear. And one other thing. Go ahead. Someone else had another one because it's actually. Say again. Sorry. Go ahead.
Courage.
I actually agree with that. That wouldn't be the first thing I always thought of the first few times I showed this, but the more I do, yeah, the sailors who are trying to help save the life of their fellow, they're not sailors again, but that's for lack of a better word, the crewmen, if you want to say it that way, we're trying to save they're showing some courage because, after all, there's some risk, especially for these two guys with their hands near the shark. So there's some courage, but the first and most important two emotions here, right, are the fear that they feel for their friend and maybe having to watch him die, right? And he feels that's clearly fear on his face. What else would it be? And then the other one is, I guess you could say, not dedication, but, Yeah, courage. You could say courage. This sake, courage or determination. There we go. That's the word I was thinking of. Determination to save the life of a friend in the face of deadly dangers. So, what's the moral lesson? That's the last thing you should write about the meaning. It's this: that in order for supposedly, I'm sorry, I didn't say the shark. This should be obvious. The shark represents evil. As if it's evil. It's just trying to survive, and somebody put a piece of food right in front of it. It's just doing what nature tells it. But supposedly the shark in this painting represents evil. And Watson, never mind, in my mind, he represents stupidity. Don't write that. But of course, here he's supposed to represent innocence, right? Innocence, never mind, carelessness, but innocence or good, even in a broader sense, versus evil. So you could just say this represents the conflict between or contest between good and evil. Who's going to win? Well, they saved his life, so good wins. So here we go. Last thing about the meaning is a single statement that the painter himself actually said this about the reason he painted this scene. In order for good to triumph over evil, it is necessary for good men to band together, period. In order for good, supposedly Watson, to triumph over evil, symbolized by the shark, it's necessary for good men, the people in the boat, of course, to band together. Well, it's a general moral kind of lesson that this painting is trying to convey. So there you got plenty, more than 6 facts on the meaning, but it's such a complex and interesting painting. And it was one of the first mass popular paintings too, in that sense that people bought it and then showed it, the wealthy collectors who could afford to hire, or pay commissions, the right word, sorry, commission Copley to paint copies for them, then and just keep it in their wine cellar. They would show it off and it might loan it to museum. Eventually they all ended up in museums, by the way. I think so. I don't think any private collector still has a copy. It's about like 8 copies. You could just say several copies exist in different museums in both Europe and North America. Okay, so formal analysis. Well, we've already said that the color green isn't realistic, but it's cool, and so is the shark. The clothing on most of the crew members, shipmates, if you want to call them that, is mostly cool. But the boat's warm, their skin tones are warm, and of course the nude body of Watson, those are warm, as is the background's mostly warm, isn't it? The clouds and the buildings. He got this right, by the way. There is the oldest lighthouse in this hemisphere is right at the entrance of the harbor of Havana. If you ever see a movie filmed in Cuba now, there are some being filmed there, even outside of Cuba by non-Cuban filmmakers, and occasionally available on Netflix. That's an accurate portrayal of the harbor, but he could have gotten that from engravings. The city was hundreds of years old, so he could have seen engravings of the harbor or talked to this crew. So he got that correct. And so those are realistic simulated textures, even if a little bit modeling wise, though, this is soft and diffused, isn't it? In the background, but sharp and realistic modeling on the foreground. Obviously the boat, the crewmen, the shark and Watson, and even the water in the foreground are all sharp, realistic modeling, strong modeling, and sharp and realistic simulated textures on the hair, the skin, the clothing, the shark, except for the lips. Okay, and then the rhythm is obvious with all the arms, hands, legs, the ship's masts, the church. These are churches, which are still there, at least I think one of them is. And so all the buildings, you could just say, create rhythm in the background. The largest mass is the water. And then it's a close call, probably the boat, that they're in. And then I think the shark looks to me a little bit larger than Watson. So then he'd be the 4th largest man, since you can't see the whole bodies of the men in the boat. All of Watson's body shows up except the lower part of his right leg. By the way, you have to write this, but these people became rich and famous. Well, Watson did. Can you believe they went back to England and this story was in newspapers all over the British Isles? Like shark sightings often get in the media here, but because there wasn't a lot else to talk about, and shark sightings and in the waters, I don't think so, off of England. So it was such a rare occurrence that made all of these people famous. They all got interviewed. Well, they got painted here and multiple times, but Watson became rich. He had a wooden leg, and he I'm not making this up. He toured the whole British Isles, Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, for years afterwards, charging fees to tell this true story of how he foolishly jumped in the water.
Wait, he had a wood leg because of this story? Like the
Oh
shark?
yeah, well sure. Well look, see, yeah, no,
Yeah, it looks
definitely.
bloody.
Yeah, the bottom. See, I think it was below the knee actually. So here it's not even quite that. That detail isn't quite right. Yeah, he lost his leg below the knee, but wooden legs, of course, were easy to
Oh,
get a photo. But yeah, so he literally went all over England. I'm sure he had an agent, booking him, whatever. You don't have to write that, but it is an interesting fact. I guess you could put as part of the meaning, but you'll have to add any more facts now. So let's wrap this up. We have line here is thin everywhere, thin outline, right? And here there is scientific perspective, obviously, in the horizon. There's right behind this guy, right? Vanishing point, and of course overlapping, foreshortening, diminishing size. You guys can do most of this now on your own because you all did it on your papers. And let's see, what else have we got? Oh yeah, atmospheric perspective. Oh, very strong with that fog. That but even then you would have some atmospheric perspective, even if it was totally clear and there was no fog in the painting. You'd still see a hazy look on the colors, at least, of the buildings in the background. So it has a realistic approach to space here. And it is both stable and dynamic. Stable on the structures in the background, dynamic on most of the crew members in the boat, and the shark and Watson. Balanced. Some people feel it's weighted. I guess I would agree with that somewhat, or more so, mostly to the right. And I guess top to bottom, if you count the sky, is empty, although there are clouds. And of course the skyline. But if you drew the line here, you decide. I consider it roughly balanced top to bottom because of the number of people in the boat who are above the medium line. And then this area here, and this area, and this area here, with Watson. But that's up to you to decide. It's not 100% clear, but I would agree that it is pretty clearly unbalanced toward the right. Colors, of course, cool on the water, the shark, and warm. I think I covered that with Watson. Okay, now we got to pick up the pace here for our next. Anyway, that's one of the more interesting ones. We had to cut the unit on architecture, neoclassic architecture out. We just don't have time for it, so we got to keep going here. We're going to look at this next one. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh yeah, you know what? I promised you I would cut one at least. I will cut it off the must-know list because we have 13, and I think realistically, by the time we do our logging in and my brief announcements, and you guys have your questions, and then we do the full lecture on each of 6 slides, that's about how many we can do in one day in the time we have. So we have 6 today and 6 tomorrow. So we got to cut one from today. So cross off Vigée Lebrun, Marie Antoinette, and her children. First of all, it's one of the longest titles in the entire course that you'd have to memorize. Well, you wouldn't have to memorize, right? It's all you still this. But anyway, everyone hear that. Week 11, the second slide down. Vigée, her name was Lebrun. She was a very successful female painter. So I'll tell you what this is about briefly. And we won't do, you have to take notes. We won't do a full meeting and no formal analysis. I think most people know who she was. Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France. Well, people debate that. Some would say Napoleon's wife, Josephine, but she was called an empress. That was her own title. So you can just say the last royal queen, born, right, royal queen of France was Marie Antoinette. So this shows her with her family. And the painting was done. If you're interested about this, it could be an interesting subject either for second paper or other paintings by the same artist, or for extra credit even. If you there's a movie about her, the painter I'm talking about. There's plenty of movies about Marie Antoinette, but I don't know. Kirsten Dunst, I can never say her, plays her in a movie. And the first half of the movie is pretty good, but when they start playing disco and rap music during some of their teas and dances and balls in the Versailles Palace, I turned it off. That's too far gone from reality. The reality is that she was married at 15, if you didn't know this, and her husband was just a total jerk, the last king of France, Louis XVI. And so I feel some empathy for her when she was first arrived in France, but she was on the throne for 20 years. She was in her mid 30s. She had a group of spies, her own private spies out in the countryside telling her the people are starving. If you don't do something to help them, they're going to rebel. And she ignored it. So I don't have much sympathy for her at the end of her life. But whatever, capital punishment isn't something that a lot of us think should happen. So you know what happened. She lost her head, so did her husband. But her children were put in prison, and one of them, I think it was the oldest son, was executed. That's That's not appropriate. So yes, it was tragic what happened to her. But this is before the revolution, obviously, and before she even realized it was coming. It's not long before. It's like 2 years before the revolution started. And at this point, she was still ignoring all the warning signs and just living the life of luxury, of course, at Versailles Palace with her on again, off again husband. Obviously, it's not obviously had multiple affairs, as almost every king of France back then did, and some think she did. But anyway, she at least was a good mother. Nobody disputes that. She really, really cared about her children and did a good job raising them. So that's what this painting emphasizes: her role as a mother, as well as the painting itself. Of course, is an example of portrait painting is more often done for upper class, wealthy, or powerful people. But that started already to change a little bit. Remember with Rembrandt. Rembrandt's one of the first painters, along with Hals, to show images of poor, working class, and even disabled or disadvantaged rejects of society in some of their paintings. But that's about 100 years before this. But most painters were still painting the upper classes because that's where the money was. Okay, so now we're going to do this one. I believe, yeah, she doesn't have the one that I will show you. Whoops, we got to go back here. It'll have to be next week. There's two by the same painter. This is the first one. It's a must-know. Okay, David is how we pronounce it in English, but the French say David. That's his last name, not his first name. And the title of this one is Death of Marat, M-A-R-A-T, Death of Marat, 1793. Well, this is speaking of the French Revolution, so there's a lot of meaning to this. I'll try to keep it to just the highlights, but it'll be more than 6 sentences, no question. You'll have more than enough facts if it's on. And again, this one, I'm not cutting it from the study list. It's a really important slide or painting. So this is by David. Who was he? He was the most famous and successful of all of the neoclassic painters. So there's your second definition for this in next, for the next two topics. So I said that we'd get to it today. Here we go. It's not too long. It's two lines. One medium length sentence. Here we go. Neoclassicism. It's on your list of terms. Of course, you should fill this in now as I give it to you. Neoclassicism was a movement of painting in Europe, or you could say European painting, a movement of European painting from, I used to give the exact years, but that's too specific. So you could just say from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s, a movement of European painting from the late 1700s to the mid 1800s, comma, which was a revival of ancient classical art, more realistic than previous revivals, period, which was a revival of ancient classical art that was more realistic than past revivals. That fits this painting to a T. But what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at a man named Marat. And by the way, if it's on the exam, you guys should have no problem getting credit for spelling his, well, it's on the syllabus, it's open note, as you all know, the final will be. There's the painter's name, and there's the name of the guy the painting is named after, the Death of Marat. So who was he and how did he die? He was one of the leaders of the Reign of Terror, and please spell that R-E-I-G-N, not R-A-I-N. That kind of reign, you've all heard of it, I'm sure, where the guillotine was working so rapidly that they executed several people in like, I'm not several, dozens, I meant to say, dozens of people each hour, like throughout, even at night sometimes, but certainly every daylight hour for months. The estimates range from 50 to 250,000 people. That's if you count those that were executed in other parts of France. Paris alone, it was at least 50,000 died. I mean, that's a lot of people, of their own citizens they killed on the mere suspicion, almost never any evidence, but just merely being accused of being, quote, an enemy of the revolution, unquote, would get you death. You had no rights. You didn't have a trial. You were arrested. This guy would sign your death warrant. That's who he was. He enjoyed that process. Marat was a vicious, well, he was a mass killer, you could say it that way, but that sounds like a criminal, at the street level, like a serial killer. He wasn't like that. He was an official. He was one of the three dictators, and they were dictators. There were three men who ran France at the time during the Reign of Terror. But he's the one that signed most, not all, but most of the death warrants, Marat, and he relished that role. He enjoyed sending people to their death. So what happens to him here is, well, I would call it poetic justice. In any case, the surviving sister of one of his victims, he had ordered the execution of her brother, disguised herself as a man, and her name was Charlotte Cordray. I've learned her name now. I didn't used to know it. She's a heroine to me, a heroine of world history, really, because the French Revolution affected all of Western culture, right, in different ways. I don't have to go into that now, but we will talk about that and the echoes of it when we get to some of the other slides. But on this one, you just need to keep it to the fact that he was one of the three dictators of France during the Reign of Terror. He is the one who signed most of the death warrants for tens of thousands of people. By the way, guillotine wasn't just in Paris. And there was only one in Paris. There were dozens of guillotines all over France operating, I don't know about 24/7, but every day. Months and months and months. I think it went on for over a year. In any case, so during the height of the Reign of Terror, he executed one person, a brother of his surviving sister, who got revenge. Here's how. She dressed as a man and made up a phony, here it is in his hand, list of enemies of the revolution that he would, of course, then sign their death warrant. That's what he's got here, is a pen, a quill pen, of course, in his hand. And so he had a skin disease. That's why he was in his bathtub. He had to spend hours a day in a bathtub. She knew where he lived because I guess it was public knowledge. So she went to his apartment in Paris, obviously, and dressed as a man, disguised as a man, if you want to say, because probably wouldn't let her in. No, it was a woman, let alone guess that she was a relative of one of his victims. So she claimed to have evidence of a more, future victims, well, they would have called them enemies of the revolution, a list of them, she said, that she wanted to give to him. So she got the whatever guy, so it was a butler, call him a servant, there we go, servant, to admit her, let her go upstairs and hand him this phony list. That's what was going on when she then took out a knife, obviously hidden in her clothing, and stabbed him, I think it was 16 times, just say multiple times. He bled to death in his own bathtub. That's what's happening here. It's a pretty powerful, intense moment in French history, well, world history. Why? Because her trial, she was executed, but it brought out the cruelty and the total injustice of the Reign of Terror. How people, you want someone's apartment, you accuse them of being enemy of the revolution, you get their apartment. I'm not going to say it compares quite, but there's a vague similarity to that Texas abortion law. If you don't know about it, look it up. Who's enforcing that? People that will tell on someone else. Yeah, it's a sick state of mind that happens in some cases, politically or otherwise. In this case, at the highest levels of political leadership, they were, rewarding people for turning in their fellow citizens, neighbors. Or you want someone's wife, you covet them, you accuse her husband of being enemy of the revolution. There's your competition, gone. You'd be dead within like 2 days, 3 days after you were arrested, usually a week at most, and no chance to defend yourself. So she got a trial though, because of what she did was such a rare. The assassin, and she was an assassin, got a trial. Now she was convicted and executed, but that helped break the back of the Reign of Terror. That's a pretty important point in the period of French, and then I would go further, Western history. The French Revolution, as I said, had echoes throughout the whole Western world for many decades after it happened. So this was a turning point, you could say. But why is it neoclassic? What's classical about it? First of all, it's super realistic. That's part of the definition, remember, of all neoclassic paintings. Everything's sharp, and we'll do the formal analysis in just a couple minutes. But he is in a pose that echoes, you could say, or was inspired by, if you want to say, reflects, whatever word you want to use, the many sculptures of the Roman era, which were in museums at this time. There were museums already open by this time, in which Roman soldiers or leaders, mostly actually Roman leaders, were willing to die to defend the people of Rome, or you can say their city. We're talking about early Roman history. Sculptures of early Roman leaders were posed like this in museums throughout France, throughout Europe, but you could just say all over France. Certainly in Paris, you could have gotten to see one or more. And so the pose here is not exactly the way the dead body looked. David was trying to say, here's the last part, what is his moral lesson? Neoclassic paintings almost always had, even more often than romantic paintings, a moral lesson. And the moral lesson is supposed to be that we admire him for having given his life to defend the revolution. Never mind the cruelty and the injustice of killing tens of thousands of innocent civilians. So David was blindly supporting the revolution despite its extreme excesses. And he's trying to make people feel empathy that this guy's a martyr. That's not how most people in France were. They celebrated in some parts of the neighborhoods of Paris when they heard he was dead. And that's why her trial, they actually gave her a trial. They had to at least make a mock trial instead of just executing his executioner, because she had become popular with a large portion of the French masses. And so they couldn't just send her to death without pretending to give her some rights, even though her sentence was preordained. So even though she sacrificed, the real martyr here was her, not him. That's what I'm saying. Okay, but he, the artist, David, wanted us to think that Marat was a hero, a martyr for the revolution. Okay, so there we go. It's all more than enough meaning you need for the exam. Formal analysis. Well, here's interesting. Let's do space here. Obviously, there's foreshortening on the top of his, on this little, well, it's not even a table, whatever you want to call it, a wooden box, on his body, on the bathtub. But there is no, and overlapping, but there's no other techniques for space. It's not enough of a view for us to see diminishing size. There is no atmospheric perspective. That is just, is that a wall? Is it a curtain? Is it wallpaper? We don't know. We're not supposed to. So there is no scientific perspective or atmospheric perspective here, or diminishing size. It's just overlapping and foreshortening for space. The largest mass, well, it's a close call, probably the bathtub if you count that as one mass. Then I guess the wooden box, and then his body, and then the note. Everything is super sharp, as is the definition of all neoclassic paintings in the, simulated textures, of course, on his skin, and even his wound there. Actually, it's surprising he didn't paint the multiple stab wounds. We know he was stabbed multiple times. There was an inquiry, and it's the records of it are still available in some library somewhere, I'm sure, National Archives in France. And blood here, and of course the wooden texture of the wooden box, and the cloths that, around his body and over his head, and even the note. There's a super sharp, realistic simulated texture and strong, realistic modeling on every object. And then we have let's see, dynamic or stable. It's mostly stable. Look carefully. His arm is down just a little bit at the bottom half, but mostly he's almost at a right angle. His upper arm and this arm, the bathtub, the wooden box, even his head is almost at a 90-degree angle. So it's more stable than dynamic. Most neoclassic paintings were more stable than dynamic. The reverse of romantic paintings, we just discussed how they're mostly dynamic. All the lines are thin. The colors are warm on his skin and the wooden box, cool on the cloth and the cover of the bathtub. You could say the background. Well, maybe it's a mixture, depending on where you look, I guess. Yeah, this corner looks like it's got a little bit of warm color in the background. So it's a mixture there. Okay.
Did you say that green could be kind of like left up to interpretation?
Yeah. That's. I give you guys flexibility. Good point. Good question. I did want to make sure I said that, because I think on your grading the midterms, I tried to be and told my readers to be flexible about that. Because if you think of this as more yellowish green than blue green, you could make the case that the top of the bathtub cover is warm, but I would definitely say that the sides you see here, that to me is cooler, right? So yeah, good point.
Just wondering.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, and that's absolutely always the case. I give you guys flexibility on things like that. Then we also have the balance. It's unbalanced toward the bottom. I would say roughly balanced left to right, even though his head is above the note. Somehow visually, if you squint, it almost feels balanced. But if you want to say technically, yes, I wouldn't dispute that it's somewhat or slightly more weighted or unbalanced toward the left. Okay, I think we've covered everything. Let's move on now to the next must know, which is Goya. And I think I gave you only one Goya, and we only have time for one, but boy, is he an important artist. So let's get to that. Okay. This is Goya. It's at the top of the next page. The artist's last name, Goya. The 3rd of May, 1808. And the date is 1814. Okay. This one, Antonio Banderas plays him in a movie. I can't remember the title of it, but you could look that up and get extra credit if you remember about 2 pages of summary of what you learned about Goya. It's about him during the Napoleonic period. So who was Goya? Oh, by the way, this is really important. I didn't finish. When I didn't finish with the date, I apologize. The title is the 3rd of May, 1808. The date, I tried to help you guys out to remember if it's on the exam. Of course, you'll have your notes in front of you. Is 1814. The painting itself was painted in the next decade. Why wasn't it finished right after the incident it depicts? Oh, for very good reason. So let's start with Goya. Who was he? The most famous Romantic painter, some would say of all time, but certainly the most famous Spanish Romantic painter. I would say it this way. He was the most famous Romantic painter of his era. The Romantic era lasted for generations, that movement of painting. And so what we have here is someone from, like the 2nd generation, if you could say that. Just say the, mid-Romantic era in terms of the history of that movement. So I'll say it again. Goya was the most famous Spanish Romantic painter ever and the most famous Romantic painter of his era. Period. He was known throughout Europe. Very, very influential. So what happened in this scene is the true incident that occurred after Napoleon occupied Spain. Napoleon's soldiers, because he didn't personally go there. He sent his brother to be king of Spain. But the people of Spain had already rebelled against their own king. They didn't want another king. They thought Napoleon was going to give them democracy. That's what he said when he first sent his soldiers there to help overthrow their own king. So you could just say that the French army under Napoleon invaded Spain, originally promising to give them democracy, and instead Napoleon puts his brother on the throne as the new king. The people rebelled. So what happened one night in Madrid when the French were occupying all of Spain, but obviously Madrid, the capital, of course, there were thousands of French soldiers. On a patrol one night in Madrid of French soldiers in the streets of Madrid, somebody took a shot, you could say pot shot if you want, from a window at some of the soldiers. I don't even know if they killed 1 or 2 or just wounded some, but they definitely attacked some French soldiers on patrol. And the French commander, responded by rounding up all of the males over 15 in that neighborhood. All of them. 1,500, some say 2,000, just say well over 1,000 or, around 1,500 or, somewhere in that range. The exact number we know was well over 1,000. Marched them up a hill and executed them all with his soldiers, of course, firing like a firing squad. That's literally what they're doing here. These are French soldiers. If that's not obvious, Napoleon's army always dressed like that. And these people are defenseless, unarmed civilians. Obviously, this is a war crime. Today, we'd call it a war crime. And that phrase actually was being used around this time by, social critics, you can call them, or critics, however you want to say, commentators. But Goya's point here was not only to show the crime itself, but to encourage the rebellion against Napoleon's soldiers. This painting was so powerful that he couldn't finish it while the French still occupied Spain. That's why he didn't finish it until years later. So what did he do? How could he inspire people to rebel against the occupying French if you couldn't see his painting? Well, he was brilliant. He was another of those early savvy marketers, you could say it that way. He was an engraver as much as he was a painter. So engravings could be mass produced that far back. I think they're called lithographs, but you don't have to know that word. So you could just say copies, thousands of copies of the first version of this painting, which he painted as, like most painters do. They paint a study, right? And many of you have done this. I know a lot of you wrote in your mini bios. You actually take an art composition classes, right? And maybe many of you are now. So you know that if you're going to do a major painting, well, I don't know if you do that in these JC art classes, but if you really got to do a big painting, and this is huge, it's almost life size, the actual final version. That wasn't finished, as they say, till after Napoleon's soldiers were gone. So he couldn't do that without risking arrest, torture, execution by the French. So instead, he did a study, a small version, and then he drew an engraving of it. And those engravings were mass produced, sent all over Spain, and they definitely had an influence in the rebellion that started after this incident. The rebellion really didn't exist until this incident and his drawings of it. And they circulated all over Spain and helped inspire the first successful rebellion against Napoleon. The Spanish are proud of that fact, the people of Spain. I love Spain. I've been there several times. I have friends there. They are rightfully proud of the fact that they're the first country in Europe to successfully kick Napoleon's soldiers out. It took them 5 years or something, but they just kept fighting the French occupying army, and eventually Napoleon had to withdraw. And the next thing he did was turn on a country called Russia. A big mistake. It always is. Invading Russia has never worked out for any of those dictators that have tried, if you know your history course, Hitler being only the most recent. So this is a turning point, again, in world history. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Not just Western history, but world history, because it's one of the first paintings of a war, last facts about the meaning now, of a war crime as it happened. And it's an accurate, because there were witnesses. Who were they? The women and children of these victims describe what happened, because some of them are in the background overlooking. I didn't catch that until the first or second time I showed this. Some of them are in the background, or the next crew of victims or group of victims who are going to be executed. So what we have here is a war crime in progress, and one of the first paintings of that type of event, and also a political statement, which help influence, and also probably the most famous Goya painting, and certainly one of the most famous Romantic paintings of all time. So let's do the formal analysis. Is it balanced? Yes. I would say this group here, clearly, of the next set of victims, balanced with the group of soldiers who are acting like robots, aren't they? In fact, I think somewhere someone wrote, maybe it was Goya, in a comment about this night, that they acted like robots. They had that word then, a little different meaning than we have now. Not AI type, but automatons, people that act like they have no mind. They were just following orders. They were behaving like robots of death. That's you don't have to write that, but you could use that phrase as to how the French soldiers were depicted here, like robots of death. They just kept executing hundreds and hundreds all night. In fact, their weapons got so hot that they had to get new muskets or dip them in cold water to cool them off. That's how rapid they were killing people rapidly. Okay, so we have balance, definitely. I would say, because to me, if you draw the line across here about the level of the rifles, it's true the sky, most people think of it as empty. So if that's how you see it, you just, well, go ahead and say it's unbalanced mostly toward the bottom. But if you count the clouds in the sky, it's a night sky, of course, nighttime event. Maybe you could call it roughly balanced. The rhythm is obvious, but I especially like the rhythm here. Look at this. That man's arms and this man's arms are exactly in the same pose. And so are, it's a masterpiece. By the way, I've been to Spain, the museum where this is in Madrid. It's called the Prado. And the people that come there, the young art students, well, they're not all necessarily young, but most of them are, college age students, are every time I've been to that museum, 3 times, people will sit for hours painting it. I'll go through the museum, come back and take a look at the painting, and the same group of people, the same classes there with their teacher, because it's so famous. It's used as an exercise in art classes from all over Spain. Okay, so the rhythm is here. Obviously, the rifles, the hats, and the uniforms of the soldiers create rhythm. We have soft, diffuse modeling. Oh, that's typical of almost all Romantic painting. It's even more obvious on the clothing of these victims and their faces, right? And even the uniforms of the soldiers, and definitely the background of the city skyline of Madrid. The largest mass is the hill behind them. And then you decide, is it the soldiers? If they're all one mass, they'd be the next largest. And then the next group of victims, that's how I would see it. Or you could say perhaps the skyline, but I think they're slightly wider, taller. So maybe fourth largest would be the buildings in the background. There is no sharp line as outline on the victims, but there is some bold outline on the soldiers, you'd have to say, around their uniforms to some degree. And perhaps this next victim here, the one that's not, now the one that's about to be shot, one of the ones in the next group, is more soft and diffuse modeling and similar texture, is also realistic, but soft in the light of that candle. It's a lamp. They would have called it a lamp. It's a kind of early version of a spotlight, and it was used by painters all the way back to, well, I think we talked about that. Caravaggio used one of those in the studios, so it was nothing new. This candle box, they would call it, and that creates a soft diffused simulated texture and modeling on all the victims, the next group of victims. But it's definitely true on the background. So most of the simulated texture and modeling is soft and diffused, except, and the line is also the same, very minimal. There's not really any outline on this man here and some of these other ones in the background, but you would say there's some bold outline on the French soldiers. Okay, it is stable on the soldiers, right? Pretty much, except their legs, but their bodies and their rifles. Dynamic on the victims, stable on the skyline, the background, and this rock. So it's a mixture. For space, you have overlapping, foreshortening, and diminishing size. I don't know if you can call this atmosphere, but I guess you could. There's a little bit of a blue hazy. I don't know if there's scientific perspective. Just say it appears that there probably is a vanishing point. Okay, so overlapping, foreshortening, diminishing size, vanishing point, probably, and atmospheric perspective. Okay, and the colors, of course, are cool on his shirt and the light box here, but warm on almost everything else, on the blood. And of course, this is also romantic because that's not realistic. You wouldn't see blood at night, that far away, that bright. That's deliberately exaggerated. So bold, vivid, and unreal colors. Obviously, it's a dynamic, right? Most everything except the soldiers and the buildings is dynamic. This is a dynamic imagination. He wasn't there, so it's an imaginative composition. And of course, the emotional component is moral outrage. If that's not obvious, you should write that. Of the painter and anyone who saw this, certainly any Spanish citizen, or even the engravings of it. Okay, let's see. Rhythm, of course, the heads, hands, arms, legs. Okay, I think that takes us, up to where we started about 3:03 or 3:04, so we're right at the time limit. So now, anybody have any questions? I'm going to stop the share. I'll stick around as always. About extra credit, grading, or the paper. Remember, if you joined us late, a couple people did. The due date, it's on my copy of the syllabus, the only one I've ever seen, and that's the 8th of November. I don't know how some people have the 10th. There's no classes on the 10th. It's a federal holiday. So 2 weeks from today, your papers are due. So you should be picking a topic if you haven't already and beginning to do the research. And hopefully by the end of this week, you could start the writing. And remember, you can show me what you've written as a rough draft or semi-final draft, but you need to say that if that's what you're doing, because otherwise I'll assume you're just submitting your final draft early, and then I'll just log it in and then grade it after all the others come in, like after the 8th. But if you want me to give you feedback, you have that option. Just don't wait till the day before it's due. So as long as you got in touch with me by, let's say, the 5th or 6th before that weekend, I can get back to you with any feedback about if anything is missing. And,
Hey, Mark, I have a question for you.
Sure, absolutely. What?
Not about today's works, but actually last week when you were showing different sculptures, especially from Africa, etc. When we look at sculptures or statues, is it fair to say that more often than not, there's not modeling nor line in a lot of sculpture?
Modeling would be always, in essence, you're right. But the way you'd write it, on an exam, right? Well,
Yep.
One more, or any paper, your second paper, that's what's left, right? These last two assignments is to say the model, there is no technique for modeling, but the modeling that appears in this image or this photo, whatever, is from the museum lights or from sunlight if it's outdoors.
Yeah, from natural light or whatever.
What was the other thing besides modeling?
And the other one I asked you about was line.
Oh, line. Oh, yeah, there's carved line in sculpture. Always, always. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Some abstract sculpture is totally smooth, like a giant round ball or, a sphere of some kind, or maybe even possibly a bot.
But obviously
you're not going to write about that probably. So if there's any
carved line, if we're showing a body, a head or something.
It's carved line only. Yeah.
Okay.
Once in a while, not many of you are going to probably ever even see one of these, but there are a few ancient Greek and Roman sculptures that still have color or have been restored with the original colors. They weren't always white marble. Some of them were, but many of them were painted. Now there could be painted line, but that's really unlikely to be what you're going to write about. So usually it's carved line.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. Sure, another question. Anybody else? Because that's what this is.
Yeah, I got a quick question. Sorry. So I know you've answered this before,
That's fine.
but
Go ahead.
so when it comes to the papers, it doesn't have to be just architecture. It could be just like the last one. You
Oh,
could pick any.
you have a choice of either any work of art you want. And you just remind me, this could be helpful to yourself, maybe, I don't know, or any other fellow students, if you don't mind. If the person speaking, who is this? Is it?
Me, Paulo.
Okay. Yeah. If you wanted to help out both, well, me, so I can help out your fellow students, Paulo, yeah, if you wanted to send me a quick email to remind me to forward to you, I meant to do it over the weekend, but boy, this was a busy weekend, not to mention weather-wise. We had some flooding here too. And luckily not inside actually we did in one room of my house. Yep, the bathroom. Hopefully you guys didn't have those issues. The point is that I forgot, and I apologize, but I really don't want to forget. I could do it by tomorrow. Tonight I have another class in a little while, and then it'll be too late. So if you email me and remind me to forward to you tips on writing about architecture, in case anyone chooses to, it's a really helpful new PDF I created just last semester. And the students who chose to write about architecture, that's your choice. You can write about sculpture, painting, drawing, photography, or architecture. It's your choice. I used to require the second paper to be on architecture, but I don't want to pressure people in that direction. However, we're going to cover Julia Morgan. And yes, there is going to be at least one, possibly two slides of her work. They're on the syllabus, right? This is coming up when we get to the very end of this semester. So when we get, say, after your second paper is turned in, you want to, read that book. It's, on Amazon, it's like $22 or something. Yeah, it is a book I wrote, 12 years ago. It's still in print, about the first woman architect, independent woman architect, and also examples of her work that you could use for either your second paper or extra credit photography, where you go to pictures of build. There's several in Petaluma of her buildings, and one in Santa Rosa, right in your area, all over the Bay Area. So the point is that writing for a paper to write about architecture, or even on your final, there'll be at least 2 slides of architecture on your final out of 8. You will get a helpful hints, let's say, or tips, if you could remind me to forward that to you, because it's a relatively recent thing I created. It's a 1-page handout that gives you specific information on how to describe things like line and space and texture in a building, which is a little different than how you do write about that for a painting or sculpture. So if you wouldn't mind, Paolo, if you can remember to email me just as a reminder, or anybody else for that matter, as soon as we sign off, or as soon as you get to your email server, then I will forward no later than tomorrow afternoon, within the next 24 hours, probably earlier than this, that PDF. And you don't have to use it, but it'd be helpful to have it for future reference. Okay. Oh, thank you. Good. Then you'll all get that by this time or sooner, probably more like about 2 o'clock or 3. It's usually, the mornings are busy around my house, so it'll be in the afternoon that I'll forward that to all my students in all 3 classes. But your choice, what you want to write about. You don't have to write about architecture if you prefer some other medium.
All right. Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome, of course. Okay. Anybody else with any questions about either extra credit? The most anyone's extra credit is now, is it about 25 points, I think? So do you have a question, Miranda? When I see people's image, usually that.
Yeah, we just that I'd sent some, like, I think it was 5 or 6 days ago. Actually I sent 2.
Oh yeah, I didn't I get back to you with extra, if you sent, well.
No, I checked my email today, but that's okay.
Well, then you'll see it. It was late last night that I did that.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh,
Okay,
wait a minute. I think if you're the one that sent 2, one of them I couldn't open. The one that was from Asian something, I couldn't even see it. It was.
No, I wasn't Asian. Mine was.
Sorry.
Well, I got 2 from one student, but I don't think it was from you. So I'll tell you what, just to be extra thorough, Miranda, it'd be very helpful for both, my keeping up with what I usually do is get back to you within 2 days, telling you I gave you extra credit, how many points for anything.
Oh, okay.
But if somehow you didn't get that, just resend it.
Okay.
And I won't, give you double credit, of course, because it's probably stored. I thought I responded. Maybe yours is one that fell through the cracks because
I didn't go to the Asian Art Museum yet this year, so.
Oh, okay. Well, then it wasn't yours. One student, I guess it was this.
That was me.
Oh, okay. And I responded by saying, I definitely will give you the extra credit if you attended, but I have to see something more clear. It was
Okay.
too
I will send again the
Sure, then
meeting.
you'll have credit. As soon as I see it, you'll get an email by tomorrow at the latest. If not tonight, probably tonight. If I can. All right. And the same for Miranda, you can just resend yours and you'll get it
Okay.
from me within 24 hours or less. I always want to confirm what extra credit, and you can always check with me about points. For this, true for everyone, for any part of your total points. If you want to know how many points you have as of that date, up till total points, towards what grade, and then you'll know how many more you need to get an A. You can email me anytime. And the only time I don't check emails is from Friday evening till Sunday, because that's Sunday evening. That's family time. But any other type of the week, you'll get a response within 24 hours usually to say, yes, you have X number of points total. And I don't usually need to say, but if you want me to, I'll say, and you need X more to get an A or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. I'll resend it right now, actually.
Yeah, that'll be good because you'll get the confirmations very soon. Okay, everyone will usually within 24 hours on a weekday for sure. Okay, any other questions? Anybody
Yeah,
else?
Mark, real quick. Is it the same requirements for
The
the
second
second
paper,
paper as the
identical,
first? There's not a new rubric or anything?
Right.
Great.
And
Perfect.
the cover sheet I'll send it to you next, probably the weekend before it's due. So, well, even late next week, because we have 2
Cool.
weeks, which will say short paper number 2. So it doesn't get confused with the first one. And remember,
Sweet.
send it the same way. But I'll remind you guys of that. I'll hold up this thing on the screen like I did before of how to submit it to my AOL and how to label it. And the requirements
Cool.
are identical. But, obviously you can pick any work of art from any period. People still seem unclear. You don't have to stick to something on the syllabus or from any periods of time that the syllabus covers. You can pick any work from any era, except your own, of course. Okay, hope that helps.
Sounds good. Thank
right.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome, JT. Okay, anybody else? Now's a good chance to ask any urgent questions. Otherwise, go ahead at any point you can email me, and I usually will get back to you in 24 to 48 hours from when you email me. As soon as I see it, in other words. Okay. All right. One last call? Anybody else have any questions that are urgent that you want me to answer? All right, I'll see you all to finish. We have quite a bit more, actually more than 6 slides to cover, so we'll get right to the material. So hopefully you all log in by 3:05 or so on Wednesday, and we'll finish Romantic. And I think some of the most juicy, well, let's put it this way, some of the most powerful, I better say that's the right word, interesting and meaning laden works of art ever painted, including the Slave Ship. If you don't know that one, you'll want to take extra careful notes because that's high up on the list. That'll probably be the last slide we see on Wednesday. So you want to sign in on time and stick with the whole lecture if you possibly can, of course, because quite a few of those are ones I will cut from the study list. All right, see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
Bye, thanks.
Take care.